9935th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Hans Grunberg, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, and Ms. Joyce Masuya, Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Hans Grunberg.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, families across Yemen have just celebrated Eid al-Adha, coming together with their families, friends, and wider community. And I want to start my briefing by wishing all Yemenis Eid Mubarak. But this moment of celebration also tragically marks 1 year since the arbitrary detention by Ansar Allah of dozens of personnel from the United Nations, national and international NGOs, civil society organizations, and diplomatic missions. Some colleagues have been detained since 2021, and there were additional detentions in 2025. Their continued imprisonment is shameful. I call again in the strongest terms for their immediate and unconditional release, and I will continue to demand their release at every opportunity I have until they are home with their families. This is the commitment I made in January to the mother, the wife, the children of my own team member who has been detained for over a year now. To the families of all our colleagues who have been deprived of their liberty, know that the United Nations will continue to stand with you. To members of this Council, I urge all of you to use your powerful voices, your diplomatic channels, and your influence to exert maximum pressure on Ansar Allah for the unconditional release of all detainees. Turning to recent developments, while the Red Sea remains calm, following the cessation of hostilities agreement between the United States and Ansar Allah, there have been multiple attacks launched by Ansar Allah in the last month on targets in Israel, including on Ben Gurion Airport. In response, over the past weeks, Israel has conducted strikes on Hodeidah Port, Salif Port, and Sana'a International Airport, destroying a civilian aircraft. I reiterate my call for all actors to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. We now see a situation where Yemenis living in Ansar Allah controlled areas are unable to fly commercially from Sana'a Airport to seek medical treatment abroad, to travel by air for their Hajj or visit their families. This was one of the key peace dividends delivered by the 2022 truce, and it had generated some sense of normalcy among civilians and a hope for a better future. Since I last briefed this Council, I have met with representatives of both the government of Yemen and Ansar Allah, as well as key regional actors, including Egypt, Iran, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. There is a general consensus that only a negotiated settlement can resolve the conflict in Yemen and provide the guarantees that the region requires, including for the Red Sea. Regional dynamics have long played a key part in Yemen's history, as well as in its current trajectory. The support of the region, as well as the wider international community, will be critical in reaching a sustainable solution for Yemen. I emphasize again, however, that time is not on our side. Conditions can change rapidly and unpredictably. The multiple front lines across Yemen remain fragile and risk descending into more active fighting. Marib in particular remains a cause for concern at this time, with reports of troop movements and occasional flare-ups, in addition to sporadic activity on other front lines in Al-Dalia, Hodeida, and Lahej and Taiz governorates. My office continues to monitor frontline developments, engage with military and security officials from all sides, and offer alternatives to a return to full-scale conflict. In the discussions my team has with members of the Military Coordination Committee, we stress the shared responsibility for all actors to step away from confrontation and instead resume discussion on a ceasefire. Madam President, in the last month, we have seen a sign of what is possible with the reopening of the Al-Dala road, a main road between Aden and Sana'a. I commend again the local facilitators across the front lines who work to make this happen. Initial scoping work is currently being undertaken by the United Nations to ensure the safety and the communities using this road, with support from civil society and my office. I encourage the parties to protect this achievement. I hope this will lead to many more openings. Yemen's economy is in dire need of positive and trust-building steps such as these. Yemeni citizens continue to shoulder the impact of an economy in free fall. More can and should be done to alleviate the humanitarian and economic hardships faced by the Yemeni people, including allowing the government of Yemen to export oil and gas and facilitating unobstructed flow of goods across the country. For Yemen to extricate itself from its current economic hardship, the parties need to move away from a zero-sum mindset towards pragmatism and compromise. There is a real scope to make progress on the economy. We in this chamber are not the only ones imploring the parties for this, nor are these concerns only being raised in high-level diplomatic meetings. Over the past month, we have seen more protests led by women in Aden, in Taiz, Lahej, and Abyan, demanding solutions and action to address the dire economic deterioration and lack of basic services. They demand a more dignified life, including the payment of salaries and accountability. I underscore the importance of respecting the rights of all citizens to demonstrate peacefully. Civic space must be protected by all parties, and I'm particularly concerned that Nasrallah continues to suppress civil society voices and recently conducted a new wave of arrests among journalists and public figures, this time across the Hodeida governorates. Madam President, this month also marks a year since the government of Yemen and Nasrallah last met under UN auspices to discuss the release of conflict-related detainees. Despite continued attempts to bring the parties together, progress on this file has slowed to almost a standstill. There are thousands of detainees, some of them have been languishing for 10 years, and this is unacceptable. In stark contrast, we see the exchanges of prisoners in other active conflicts around the world, and I call on the parties to reprioritize this humanitarian file and move forward based on the agreed upon all-for-all principle. Madam President, I have stressed the importance of the ties between Yemen and the wider region. We need to build on the recent cessation of hostilities in the Red Sea and provide durable guarantees to the region and the wider international community, and ensure the safety of all those using this critical waterway. This effort goes hand in hand with our ongoing work towards a roadmap that will help Yemen overcome its current divisions and lead to a comprehensive ceasefire, critical economic measures, and an inclusive political process. I will continue to work with the Yemeni parties, the region, and the broader international community towards this goal, identifying pragmatic and achievable steps to move forward. The cost of inaction is high, and Yemen cannot afford more years of division, economic collapse, and human suffering. Madam President, allow me to conclude by saying that peace in Yemen is so much more than the containment of a threat. It is first and foremost about the Yemenis. It is a country where there are incredible opportunities, a long and rich history, and lives full of promises. I want to again thank this Council for its unified and highly valued support, even when the overall situation remains so challenging to realize this potential for Yemen. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Grunberg for his briefing, and I now give the floor to Ms. Joyce Msuya.
Thank you, Madam President. As ever, I thank Special Envoy Grunberg for his briefing and his tireless endeavors to support a peaceful political solution. Earlier this month, we marked 1 year since the Houthi de facto authorities arbitrarily detained dozens of staff from the United Nations, national and international NGOs, civil society organizations, and diplomatic missions. These staff joined others held since 2021 and 2023, and more held this year. 23 UN staff remain detained, and I join the Special Envoy and the Secretary General in calling for their immediate release. Madam President, over the past 6 months, my colleagues and I have briefed this Council regularly on the devastating impact of the ongoing conflict on communities across Yemen. I would like to start today with some positive developments that merit attention. First, and as noted by the Special Envoy, a key road between Aden and Sana'a through Ad-Dahle was reopened on 29 May after being closed for nearly 7 years. This will provide civilian and commercial traffic a more direct and faster route, reducing travel times by 6 to 7 hours between the two cities and improving access to health care for communities in a number of governorates. This development, supported by the authorities and reflective of community sentiment and initiatives, shows that Yemen is not on a fixed downhill trajectory. With trust and the right tools, there remain hope. All of us here must rise to meet these opportunities with our own commitment and support. I am pleased to note, therefore, that the senior officers meeting held in Brussels on 21 May, bringing together senior representative member states, UN agencies, financial institutions, and international and Yemeni NGOs, endeavored to do just that. It was heartening to see both member states and the humanitarian community engaging on the importance of adequately funding what is now a more prioritized humanitarian needs and response plan for Yemen. I take this moment to thank the EU and Sweden for co-hosting the meeting, which supported the UN's decision to prioritize and maintain life-saving humanitarian programs in the most severely affected areas in all of Yemen. I also express my thanks to the EU, who pledged 80 million euros in humanitarian funding to support critical programming in Yemen. Madam President, as this Council knows, over 17 million people, or nearly half of Yemen's population, are estimated to be acutely hungry. Malnutrition remains a scourge across the country, affecting 1.3 million pregnant and breastfeeding women and 2.3 million children under the age of 5. Without sustained humanitarian support, an estimated 6 million more people could end up in emergency levels of food insecurity. Meanwhile, the health system is fragile at best. Lack of funding could see a further 771 health centers close and nearly 7 million people denied access to life-saving care. Women and girls face enormous risks, including gender-based violence. Madam President, despite an operating environment beset by multiple risks and serious challenges, humanitarian operations continue to forge ahead, and humanitarians remain committed and engaged. For the first 3 months of this year, a little over 4 million people a month on average received life-saving humanitarian assistance. 4.7 million people received regular emergency food assistance, and nearly 90,000 people received agriculture and fisheries support. In addition, 262,000 young children and pregnant and breastfeeding women were treated for moderate acute malnutrition. A further 77,000 children were treated for severe acute malnutrition, and more than 51,000 women received assistance from skilled personnel while delivering their babies. Within a fragile health system, 2.4 million outpatient consultations were provided in IDP and host communities, while the response to cholera continues to build on work undertaken in 2024, including through support to hospitals and diarrhea treatment centers, training of healthcare workers, and distribution of diagnostic kits. Humanitarians are clearly doing their best, but our response is constrained by the lack of funding and falls short of what the people of Yemen need. Madam President, Yemeni communities face multiple crises. Regional challenges and tensions loom large over internal political and security realities. The economy is under extraordinary pressure, and the climate crisis is making people across the country even more vulnerable. Ultimately, life-saving humanitarian assistance, though vital for community survival right now, will not be enough. There needs to be a commitment to scaling up long-term development assistance to prevent communities from sliding into more acute levels of humanitarian needs, while also ensuring access to essential services and generating economic and livelihood opportunities. Madam President, I conclude with 3 asks for this Council. Take the lead of the senior officers meeting in May and follow up with scaled-up, flexible funding based on needs to sustain our aid operation. Take real action to see that UN and other detained colleagues are released. Maintain your unified support for efforts towards lasting peace. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Masuya for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Envoy Grunberg and ASG Masuya for their briefing, and I welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Yemen in this meeting. I'll make 3 points. First, last Friday marked 1 year since the Houthis' arbitrary detention of personnel from the United Nations, national and international NGOs, civil society organizations, and diplomatic missions. As of today, 23 UN and 5 INGO personnel remain arbitrarily detained. These dedicated humanitarian workers have now been separated from their family and loved ones for over a year, and for some, over 1,000 days. 2025 has also seen the tragic death of a World Food Programme member of staff in Houthi captivity. And yet, these detentions have continued, including the recent detention of journalists and media workers. The Secretary-General's statement on the anniversary of the detentions and the briefing we've heard today from Special Envoy Grunberg highlight the profound injustice of these detentions. The individuals had dedicated their lives to providing life-saving assistance and support to the people of Yemen. Following a further press statement on the 5th of June, we, as a Security Council, have been unequivocal in condemning these ongoing unlawful detentions and in calling for the immediate and unconditional release of those detained. The UK welcomes the vital work of the United Nations and other partners towards securing their immediate release. Second, President, 19.5 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, and 4.8 million are internally displaced in Yemen. This dire situation will get worse, with increases in food security and malnutrition projected this year, compounded by disease outbreaks. The funding shortfall, ongoing detentions, and challenging operating space exacerbate these challenges. So we must continue to work together and prioritise our collective response to ensure humanitarian aid reaches those most in need. The United Kingdom recently enrolled in a joint programme with King Salman Humanitarian Aid and Relief Centre targeting the spread of cholera across Yemen. This programme will provide cholera vaccines and help strengthen local response capacity in the most high-risk and affected communities. Finally, the UK remains committed to achieving lasting peace in Yemen and the broader region. Long-term stability and security in Yemen can only be achieved by a UN-led, inclusive political settlement. And we continue to support Special Envoy Grimberg in his efforts in this regard. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of A3+, namely Algeria, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and my own country, Somalia. We thank today's briefers, Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Assistant Secretary General, Ms. Joyce Musuya from OCHA, for their insightful updates. We also welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Yemen. Madam President, on the security front, the A3+ members expressed deep concern over the fragile and deteriorating security situation in Yemen and the wider region, recalling that international humanitarian law unequivocally prohibits attacks against civilian and civilian objects. The A3+ emphasized the urgent need to prevent the militarization of populated neighborhoods and to protect civilian and civilian infrastructure from harm and destruction. The group reiterates the urgent need for coordinated effort to de-escalate tensions and protect civilians and urge all parties to uphold their obligation under international humanitarian law, including the Fourth Geneva Convention and customary principles, and to take necessary measures to protect civilian populations in Yemen from further harm. We commend efforts leading to practical actions like reopening roads, resolving local disputes face-to-face, and maintaining active coordination through channels like the Military Coordination Committee established during the 2022 truce. Madam President, A3+ is equally concerned about the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian and health situations in Yemen. The increase in infectious and mortality rates from febrile illnesses, including malaria, dengue fever, and cholera, is particularly troubling. Hundreds of new infections are being reported across several governorates, with the surge in both suspected and confirmed cases compounding an already fragile and overwhelmed healthcare system. The lack of adequate funding, essential medicines, and medical supplies is hindering the government's effort to contain these outbreaks. This health emergency is aggravating existence vulnerabilities and causing a rising rate of fatalities, particularly among women, children, persons with disabilities, and the elderly. Without immediate international support, the risk of widespread epidemic will increase significantly, threatening the lives of thousands of Yemenis. We join OCHA in urging all donor countries and international organizations to scale up their assistance to the Yemeni people. We also urge the relevant Yemeni authorities to take all necessary measures to facilitate the effective and timely delivery of humanitarian assistance and life-saving aid. A3+ reiterates our firm support for the ongoing efforts of the Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and his team in facilitating Yemeni-led, Yemeni-owned political process based on the agreed terms of reference in accordance with the relevant Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2216 of 2015. We stress that an inclusive and comprehensive political solution remains the only viable path to achieving lasting peace and stability in Yemen. We also reiterate the Secretary General's call for an immediate and unconditional release of all UN and humanitarian personnel arbitrarily detained in violation of international humanitarian law and impede essential humanitarian efforts. Additionally, we also note with appreciation that the Secretary General's report S/2025/364 on Houthis' attack on commercial vessels in the Red Sea indicates no new incidents since its previous report. The A3+ firmly maintains that securing an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza is critical toward a lasting peace throughout the region. We also stress the need to halt any actions that risk fueling the conflict in Yemen, which threatens to reverse hard-won gains and deepen humanitarian crisis. In conclusion, the A3+ stands in solidarity with Yemeni people in their quest for peace, security, and dignity. We call on all parties to demonstrate a genuine commitment to a dialogue and for the Council to remain united in support of the Yemeni sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence, and stability. We remain fully supportive of the efforts of Special Envoy Mr. Grunberg and recognize the continued contribution of the regional actors, particularly Saudi Arabia and Oman, in facilitating a constructive engagement. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to express my appreciation to Special Envoy Hans Grundberg and OCHA ASG Joyce Msuya for their briefings. I also warmly welcome the participation of Yemen's representative in today's meeting. Today, I'd like to share the following points. First, we urge the Houthis to permanently cease all hostile acts that undermine peace in Yemen and threaten the security of the Red Sea and the larger region. Despite the decline in Houthi attacks on commercial vessels, maritime traffic through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal remains approximately 60% below pre-Gaza crisis level, underscoring the ongoing threat to global commerce, supply chain, and maritime security. The Houthis' continued missile attacks on Israel not only heighten regional tensions, but also ultimately undermine a pathway toward a lasting political solution in Yemen. Additionally, we note with concern Israel's retaliatory naval strike on the Hodeidah port 2 days ago. We reiterate our call our call for all parties to fully respect international humanitarian law under all circumstances and protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. Second, we stand in solidarity with other Council members in demanding the immediate and unconditional release of all detainees, including UN, NGOs, civil society, and diplomatic personnel. This month marks 1 year since the wave of arbitrary detentions by the Houthis began. 1 year is already too long. Let us be clear. The prolonged and systematic detention of humanitarian and UN personnel is not only a depressing and self-harming moral failure, it also constitutes a violation of international humanitarian law. The safety of humanitarian workers and their access to civilians must be guaranteed, as emphasized by Security Council Resolution 2730. In this regard, we commend and encourage the continued efforts of the Special Envoy and the UN agencies through all possible channels to secure their immediate release. Third, the Security Council's arms embargo must be fully implemented as originally designed. The recent pattern of Houthi attacks leaves no doubt that ongoing violations are directly fueling instability in both Yemen and the broader region. In this context, we cannot stress enough the urgent need to appoint the panel of experts, arms expert, without further delay. This role is indispensable for monitoring compliance and preserving overall credibility of this Council's sanctions regime at a critical juncture. In parallel, the Republic of Korea reaffirms the importance of UNVIM, which plays a vital role in not only enforcing the arms embargo, but also alleviating long-standing humanitarian suffering in Yemen. As such, the international community must pay greater attention to UNVIM to ensure the effectiveness of its crucial operations. Fourth, as ASG Msuya briefed, Yemeni people are facing a complex and deepening crisis marked by malnutrition, food insecurity, and a surge in infectious diseases driving up mortality rates. Given the severe funding shortfalls, we urge the international community to heed the urgent calls from humanitarian actors on the ground for increased support. Lastly, the 2025 World Bank report on Yemen underscores the severe deterioration of public services and the worsening economic conditions. These findings highlight the urgent need for concrete political progress and sustained international engagement to reverse the trajectory of the crisis. To conclude, Madam President, in the midst of the ongoing Gaza crisis and the resulting halt in political progress, the recent reopening of roads between Sana'a and Aden, which connects people from both sides after 7 years of cutoff, offers a glimpse of hope that trust among Yemenis through people-to-people and commercial exchange can be gradually restored. We encourage all parties, especially the Houthis, to build on such momentum through further concrete actions. At the same time, the international community must remain united in its support for a Yemeni-led, Yemeni-owned, and inclusive political transition. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, we would like to thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Mr. Grunberg, and we thank the Assistant Secretary General, Joyce Msuya. We thank them for their briefings. Unfortunately, the settlement process in this country is being stalled because of instability in Yemen itself and also in the region as a whole. Working on the roadmap began more than 2 years ago, but unfortunately, to date, it has not yielded a tangible result. And currently, the negotiations on the text are essentially frozen. Against this background, and also take into account the volatile situation at the line of contact between the opposing Yemeni sides, the risk of further deterioration of the situation or even moving to a military confrontation has grown many times over. It is clear that under current conditions, it is not enough to just simply maintain the current level of mediation efforts. What is needed is to urgently revitalize the negotiations track under the UN aegis and intensify work with all sides to the Yemeni conflict whilst taking into account their legitimate interests and the realities on the ground. The goal here is to overcome distrust, to get to sustainable, mutually agreeable provisions, and they expeditiously launch the political process. It is only through an inclusive dialogue involving the entire gamut of the political forces in the country, including, of course, the Ansar Allah movement, can lay the foundation for lasting peace in Yemen. In this regard, we support the efforts made by the Special Envoy and call upon him to increase targeted work with the Yemeni protagonists, the kind of work that is aimed at finalizing the provisions of the roadmap. We, on our part, we will continue helping in this regard in any way we can. Madam President, the situation in the region continues tense, despite the fact that in the beginning of May there was a ceasefire signed between the United States and the Houthis in the Red Sea. The continued military campaign by Israel in the Gaza Strip and the Israeli impediments to humanitarian assistance to the Strip remains justification for anti-Israeli action on the part of Ansar Allah. Ansar Allah thinks it's unacceptable when Western Jerusalem uses humanitarian blockade as leverage for the release of the hostages who remain in Gaza. The attacks by the Houthis against the facilities in Israel, including those which impact the International Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, of course, are a destabilizing factor. No less destructive, however, is also a disproportionate reaction by West Jerusalem, as shown in multiple strikes against the territory of sovereign Yemen. The most recent Israeli bombardments have inflicted unacceptable damage to the international airport in Sana'a. There, more than 8 civilian planes were destroyed, and also there were attacks on the port in Hodeidah. Quite obvious, it is that this kind of use of force, regardless of their motive, does nothing but further undermine the intra-Yemeni and regional stability. Madam President, it is the everyday Yemenis who have become hostages of military confrontation. The worrying deterioration of the humanitarian situation in the country is a direct consequence not just of a long-standing crisis, but also of a gross outside interference, which was accompanied by the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Given these conditions, we see a growing number of those who need humanitarian assistance, and this number grew by more than 1 million recently and is now in excess of 19 million people. The children and the elderly are first impacted. Infections, diseases are rampant in the country, including measles and cholera. There is a chronic issue of underfunding of the UN humanitarian plan for Yemen. This year, it has reached a negative record of a sort. There's only 1/10 of the funds needed have been collected. Such a financial deficit could lead to further lowering of humanitarian operations and also stoppages in the work of critical facilities, including medical centers. We're particularly concerned by the fact that the issue of the detainees in Yemen, the UN personnel and other humanitarian organizations' personnel remains unresolved. This is not just a violation of the privileges and immunities of humanitarians under international law. This also undermines the stability of humanitarian operations in the country. The Security Council has on several occasions sent unambiguous signals stating that this kind of actions is unacceptable, and Russia, as a permanent member of Security Council, has consistently joined in with such calls. At the same time, we think that's important when dealing with this issue to prioritize a mechanism of quiet diplomacy. Quiet diplomacy, which those who are sending very strong signals to Houthis today prioritize in other contexts. It's important that we create conditions for de-escalation rather than condone confrontation, especially when we're talking about as sensitive an issue as this one. We welcome the continued dialogue between the UN leadership and Houthis on the issue of releasing the detainees and call upon all of the interested parties to support these efforts. Madam President, in conclusion, we would like to point out the important work done by the UN mission in Hodeidah. Since its inception, the mission has consistently and in good faith been implementing the tasks set to it within the framework agreements. And this includes not just monitoring the implementation of provisions on the ports of Hodeidah, Khalifa and Ras Issa, but also about helping lowering tensions, one of the key regions ensuring vital humanitarian supplies for the people of Yemen. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Assistant Secretary General Joyce Masuya for their comprehensive briefings. I would also like to welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Yemen in today's meeting. Madam President, long known for its rich history, vibrant culture, and strategic maritime heritage, Yemen today stands shattered by over a decade of unrelenting conflict. The impact of political instability, economic collapse, regional tensions, and an escalating humanitarian crisis continues to exact a devastating toll on the Yemeni people. Madam President, I would like to make 4 specific points. First, We urge all parties to build on the December 2023 roadmap, which offers a credible foundation for sustainable peace. We welcome the regional diplomatic facilitation by Saudi Arabia and Oman and the tireless efforts of Special Envoy Hans Grunberg. His recent engagements in Riyadh and Muscat, involving a wide range of stakeholders, can play a crucial role in sustaining momentum towards a political settlement. As the Special Envoy noted today, the only way forward is through an inclusive political solution, and that time is not on our side. We therefore urge that all efforts be accelerated with the objective of achieving a concrete and tangible progress, culminating in a durable and inclusive Yemeni-owned and Yemeni-led political solution. Secondly, the humanitarian situation in Yemen is dire. More than 18 million people require urgent assistance, with over 4.5 million displaced, many of them on multiple occasions. The risk of famine is acute, with tens of thousands already facing famine-like conditions and millions more experiencing severe food insecurity. Compounding this, the country is facing a dangerous surge in febrile diseases across several governorates. We call on all donors and international organizations to urgently scale up support and respond swiftly and generously to OCHA's urgent appeal. Thirdly, the regional dimensions of the conflict unfortunately continue to escalate. The targeting of civilian infrastructure is indefensible and violates international law. Strikes on seaports and airports and critical energy facilities have also disrupted vital humanitarian operations, thereby deepening the civilian suffering. For a lasting resolution of the regional conflicts, it is also imperative to have an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We have witnessed the fruits of effective diplomacy and leadership in the successful ceasefire negotiated between the United States and the Houthis. Fourthly, we express a strong condemnation of the continued arbitrary detention of UN personnel, humanitarian workers, and diplomatic staff by the Houthis. Their continued detention is a blatant violation of international law and a serious impediment to humanitarian operations. We reiterate our call for their immediate and unconditional release and for safe, unhindered humanitarian access throughout Yemen. Madam President, the intersecting crises in Yemen demand urgent, coordinated, and sustained international action. It is imperative that this Council speaks with unity and clarity to support the people of Yemen on their path towards peace, dignity, and recovery. Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering support for the brotherly people of Yemen. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, let me thank Special Envoy Grunberg and Assistant Secretary General Musuya for their informative briefings. This month marks 1 year since the first wave of Houthi detentions of UN staff and humanitarian personnel. We firmly condemn these unlawful acts and reiterate our demand for their immediate and unconditional release. We are deeply troubled by the Houthis' obstruction of the humanitarian community's ability to deliver life-saving aid at the cost of Yemeni civilians. We were pleased to see this message clearly reflected in the press statement we adopted last week. Madam President, as the conflict in Yemen drags on, the humanitarian impact grows more severe and the prospects for economic recovery grow more distant. As highlighted by the World Bank, Yemen now ranks as the third poorest country in the world. And as reported yesterday, food insecurity is soaring, with half of the population in government-controlled areas facing crisis and above levels of food insecurity, according to the latest IPC analysis. Over the past year, a combination of high inflation and currency depreciation has pushed the vast majority of Yemenis into poverty. With reductions in donor funding on the horizon, this situation is likely to deteriorate. As always, the most vulnerable suffer the gravest impact. Sustained efforts to improve the Yemeni economy are needed, along with humanitarian funding to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. Without this, more children will go to bed hungry, health facilities will cease operating, and more lives will be put at risk. Denmark will continue to do our part, as we have done for the past 10 years, providing more than $200 million in total to the humanitarian response. Madam President, Denmark firmly condemns the Houthis' continued indiscriminate attacks against Israel. These actions are unacceptable and only serve to further destabilize an already volatile security situation in the region. We urge all parties to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law. More must be done to effectively contain the destructive capabilities of the Houthis. We are particularly concerned by the reports of growing ties between the Houthis and Al-Shabaab and urge the relevant panels of experts to look into this. We must remain focused on effectively curbing illegal arms flows to the Houthis, and to this end, UNRWA must be strengthened to enhance its efficiency in enforcing the arms embargo. De-escalation in the Red Sea and in the wider region is crucial to restore maritime security and to bring Yemen back on a path towards peace. Third and finally, Madam President, Denmark extends its sincere gratitude to Special Envoy Grunberg for his tireless efforts and unwavering dedication to keeping the political process alive. We appreciate that he seized the momentum from the cessation of hostilities between the US and the Houthis to re-engage the parties through meetings in Muscat and Riyadh. And we urge all parties to continue their engagement with the Special Envoy in good faith, to deliver on their earlier commitments for a nationwide ceasefire, economic measures, and a comprehensive political process. Ultimately, only dialogue and genuine commitment by the parties will lead to real progress on the ground and real results for the people of Yemen. We call on all parties to engage to forge lasting peace in Yemen, unlock vital economic recovery, and alleviate the profound humanitarian suffering inflicted on the Yemeni people for far too long. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Panama.
Thank you, Madam President. Panama would like to express its thanks to the presidency of this council for convening this meeting, and to the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Mr. Hans Grunberg, and Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator, Joyce Masuya, we thank them for their valuable briefings and for your constant, dedicated work. The sheer scale of the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is alarming. Currently, half of Yemeni children, that's around 2.3 million, are suffering from malnutrition, and 600,000 of them are suffering from serious acute malnutrition. This serious situation is also affecting 1.4 million pregnant and lactating mothers, and it's estimated that 9.6 million women and girls require urgent humanitarian assistance. To this, we must add the fact that Yemen has recorded more than a third of global cases of cholera, and that 18% of deaths are related to this disease. In parallel, over recent weeks, we have warned of an increase in the attacks and provocations by the Houthis, which seriously endangers the civilian population and at the same time undermines mediation efforts, regionally as well as internationally. These actions not only worsen the humanitarian suffering, but they also increase the number of people displaced, of which 80% are women, girls and boys. We reject any unilateral action that could threaten regional stability, worsen the conflict, or hinder the efforts aimed at ensuring the security and well-being of the population. In this regard, we would remind all the parties to the conflict of their obligation to respect international humanitarian law, with particular focus on the protection of civilian infrastructure. It is unacceptable that 1 year on from the arbitrary detention of United Nations workers, international and local humanitarian organizations and diplomatic missions and representatives of civil society by the Houthis, that more than 24 UN officials still remain illegally detained. These people were fulfilling their humanitarian duty, providing support to those that most need it, those without access to food, shelter, and basic medical care. These acts constitute a serious violation of international law, as well as being a direct attack on the fundamental principles of international humanitarian law and the essential values of human dignity. The way that these detentions are being instrumentalized seriously undermines efforts to deliver humanitarian assistance to the Yemeni population, which need it urgently. We robustly condemn, and we issue an urgent call for the unconditional immediate release of all personnel that have been detained in this arbitrary manner. Likewise, we express our deep concern at the repression and excessive use of force exercised against women who over recent weeks have demonstrated peacefully in order to denounce the severe worsening of basic services such as access to water, electricity, and medical care. These demonstrations highlight the urgent need for effective humanitarian solutions which will address the legitimate demands of the population. We support diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions in the region, and we reiterate our support for the efforts of the Special Envoy of the United Nations for Yemen, and to assure a sustainable solution to the conflict, including the meaningful participation of women, accountability mechanisms, and transitional justice. This is why we will continue to promote and support a process which prioritizes the participation, dignity, security, and leadership of Yemeni women and girls, reaffirming our conviction that dialogue is the only way to achieve a sustainable political solution led by the Yemenis themselves, which guarantees lasting stability and security in Yemen. As pointed out by the Special Envoy, it's urgent that we address the increasing breakdown of the economy. This seriously affects the daily lives of millions of Yemenis because economic stability is fundamental in order to bring about any lasting political progress. In this context, we would insist that we must continue to step up efforts to achieve and consolidate a national ceasefire that all parties must respect and maintain, as they committed to do in December of 2023. Madam President, the consolidation of a credible and verifiable ceasefire is an indispensable condition to open up the way towards just and lasting peace in Yemen, and it requires the sustained commitment of all parties, as well as the active support of the international community. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Panama for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam President. Special Envoy Grunberg and Assistant Secretary Msuya, thank you very much for the briefing. We reiterate our full support for your unwavering efforts. We also welcome the representative of Yemen to the meeting. Madam President, as others have acknowledged, last week marked a sobering anniversary. 1 year since the wave of arbitrary detentions by the Houthis of personnel from the UN, NGOs, civil society, and diplomatic missions. A wave of detentions which are not only unjustifiable, but which intensify an already horrifying humanitarian landscape in Yemen. Simply put, needs are high, and now it is even harder to meet them. 1 year on, far too many remain in detention. This has been condemned in the strongest terms by the Council, as have the further detentions and tragic death in captivity of a WFP staff member earlier this year. Slovenia calls for a full investigation into his death and for all detained personnel to be immediately released. To respond to Yemen's deepening humanitarian crisis, we welcome the recently convened senior officials meeting in Brussels, where the European Union pledged 80 million euros in funding for 2025. Slovenia has committed additional funding to support the efforts of the ICRC in Yemen. We urge new and existing donors to step up to address our collective humanitarian responsibility and to maintain life-saving and life-sustaining programming. And we once again commend humanitarians for their commitment to staying and delivering. We furthermore call for the protection of critical civilian infrastructure in Yemen and express our deep concern about continued Houthi attacks against Israeli targets, as well as the latter's retaliatory strikes in Sana'a airport and the Hodeidah ports, critical lifelines for Yemeni civilians, which could potentially have dire humanitarian consequences and represent a dangerous escalation. We once again urge all parties to exercise the utmost restraint. Madam President, in spite of this complex and intolerable environment, time and time again we witness the remarkable resilience of the Yemeni people. We welcome the recent opening of a key road in Yemen connecting Aden and Sana'a, hopefully bringing some relief to locals and facilitating easier movement of people and goods. This development demonstrates the role of local grassroots engagement and shows what can be achieved through compromise and dialogue. It is clear that after 10 years of war, the people of Yemen yearn for normality, for functioning infrastructure, for reliable services, for the restoration of livelihoods. In their quest, Yemenis, including Yemeni women, should be afforded every freedom to exercise their legitimate rights. This includes the right to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. And we urge all authorities to ensure that the rights of Yemenis are upheld. Madam President, I will conclude by once again calling for reinvigorated discussions on a nationwide ceasefire in an inclusive UN-led peace process centered on the needs and aspirations of the Yemeni people. In particular, we reflect today on the situation of Yemeni children, whose plight was outlined in stark terms in the recently published report of the Secretary General on Children and Armed Conflict in Yemen and by USG Fletcher last month. All parties in Yemen have signed commitments to end and prevent grave violations against children, which is welcome. However, action plans and roadmaps should not remain words on paper, but be fully implemented by the parties. Furthermore, the resumption of an inclusive peace process must include child protection commitments. Ultimately, durable peace is the best way to ensure a brighter future for Yemen and its children. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for her statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Assistant Secretary General Joyce Msuya for your briefings. I'd also like to welcome the permanent representative of the Republic of Yemen. Madam President, colleagues, there have not been any ceasefire violations since the United States successfully defended freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and surrounding waterways. However, the Houthis continue to threaten regional peace and stability and the well-being of the Yemeni people. The Houthis bear overwhelming responsibility for the deterioration in the well-being and safety of the Yemeni people. The Houthis terrorize their fellow Yemenis, impede the work of humanitarian organizations, and take advantage of innocent civilians through predatory commercial and financial practices. They profiteer from petroleum imports and harass civil society members who dare speak out against them. As we have heard in the briefings, last week marked the one-year anniversary of the Houthis' unjust detention of a large number of staff of the UN, NGOs, and diplomatic missions. This includes staff of the U.S. mission. The Houthis forced detainees to confess to false charges of espionage in a series of propaganda videos released last summer. The specter of bogus trials and death sentences hangs over them. The United States calls on the Houthis to immediately and unconditionally release all of those detained by the Houthis. President, terrorist acts conducted by the Houthis extend throughout the region. On an almost daily basis over the past weeks, the Houthis have launched missile attacks against Israel, including Ben Gurion Airport. These attacks targeting civilians are accompanied by threats to impose an air blockade and a naval blockade against Israel's Haifa port. Israel has the right to defend itself. We stand with Israel against Iranian-backed terrorist groups, including the Houthis. President, the Houthis would not be able to conduct such attacks without Iran's assistance. Iran's defiance of the UN arms embargo enables the Houthis to threaten Israel, Gulf partners, and the wider region. This Council must not tolerate Iran's repeated violations of its resolutions. The United States also sees evidence that the Houthis are acquiring China-origin dual-use components and imagery from sources such as the Changguang Satellite Technology Company Limited. This company is directly financed by provincial and central authorities, derives most of its revenue from sales to the People's Liberation Army, and has the direct backing of senior leadership of the Communist Party of China. The Houthis are also deepening their relationship with al-Shabaab. This relationship should be examined, investigated, and reported on by both the Yemen and al-Shabaab panels of experts. Colleagues, a critical tool in preventing arms from reaching the Houthis is the UN verification and inspection mechanism. In fact, last month, UNVIM increased its screening and successfully interdicted 4 shipping containers of illicit materials bound for Houthi-controlled ports. This interdiction clearly demonstrates the effectiveness of this mechanism. We all need to continue supporting its operations and ensure 100% screening. To that point, we again urge member states to donate directly to UNVIM, and as we have pointed out, it needs only $11 million per year to operate at full capacity. Member states should also provide the naval assets necessary to ensure interdiction of ships not verified by UNVIM. The United States reminds member states that UNVIM clearance does not exonerate vessels from consequences arising from the U.S. designation of the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. Knowingly providing material support or resources to an FTO is a violation of U.S. law. President, the United States is vigorously pursuing all possible sanctions against relevant individuals and entities in order to deprive the Houthis of the resources that sustain their terrorist network. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to begin by thanking the Special Envoy of the Secretary-General, Mr. Hans Grunberg, for his briefing, as well as the Assistant Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator, Madam Joyce Masuya, for her remarks. And I welcome the presence amongst us of the Permanent Representative of Yemen. Madam President, France welcomes the fact that the Security Council has expressed itself to call for the immediate release of all personnel arbitrarily detained by the Houthis more than a year ago. France reiterates its condemnation of these arbitrary detentions, and we demand clarification of the facts once and for all with regard to the unacceptable death in detention of an employee of the World Food Programme earlier this year. This Council must continue to demand of the Houthis that they lift their barriers to humanitarian access and cease their repeated violations of human rights in areas under their control. The most vulnerable, in particular women and children, are the principal victims. Humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations, must be able to operate in complete security wherever the people require it. France calls upon all the parties to ensure the protection of infrastructure and civilian populations in accordance with their obligations under international humanitarian law. Madam President, France robustly condemns the recent Houthi attacks against Israel. These attacks are unacceptable and they threaten regional security. The Houthis, supported by Iran, must cease their destabilizing activity in Yemen, the Red Sea, and more broadly in the Middle East. This Council must be able to speak with one voice to condemn them unambiguously. We take note of the absence recorded by the Secretary-General of new incidents in the Red Sea. However, the Houthis must once and for all stop disturbing maritime traffic in the Red Sea. France will continue its commitment as part of the security and defence policy defensive operation of the European Union, ASPIDES, in order to protect maritime safety and freedom of navigation in accordance with international law and working together with our partners. Madam President, only an inclusive political solution will put an end to the conflict in Yemen. France supports the efforts of the Special Envoy to relaunch an inter-Yemeni political process and progress towards defining a political, economic and security roadmap. This political process must be inclusive and allow for the participation of women and young Yemenis. France once again reaffirms our commitment to the stability of Yemen and regional security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Madam President. I would also like to thank Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Assistant Secretary General Joyce Msuya for their, as always, very informative briefings today. I also welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Yemen in our meeting. I would like to make 3 points. First, this month marks 1 year since the first wave of unlawful and arbitrary detentions of diplomatic staff, UN and NGO personnel, and humanitarian workers by the Houthis in June 2024, followed by a number of similar waves of prolonged detentions. We reiterate in the strongest possible terms a call for the immediate and unconditional release of all arbitrarily detained personnel. The tragic death under Houthi detention of a member of the WFP on February this year remains unanswered. We reiterate our call for the immediate, transparent and thorough investigation of this terrible event. The recent press statement issued by this Council on the 5th of June is a unified and unequivocal message of condemnation of this detention and a strong demand for the immediate release of all detainees. Humanitarian workers face increasing violence and threats to their security. Houthi arbitrary detentions have aggravated the security condition, thus affecting the delivery of humanitarian assistance to a population devastated by dire living conditions. It is of utmost importance that the UN Humanitarian Assistance and Protection Services continue without disruption by reinforcing the funding capacity and adaptability of the Yemen humanitarian needs and response plans of 2025 and identifying priorities for action. We strongly endorse the recent EU decision to contribute 80 million euros in EU humanitarian funding for Yemen in 2025, as announced at the recent 7th Senior Officials Humanitarian Meeting which took place in Brussels. We also echo the recent call of 116 UN agencies and international and national NGOs operating in Yemen for urgent and collective action. Second, the security situation in the Red Sea region remains fragile. The threat of Houthis' aggressiveness is still present, thus sustaining a constant risk to freedom of navigation and maritime security in the region. Consequently, merchant and commercial vessels continue to divert through alternative maritime shipping corridors, making the Red Sea region as one of the most disrupted maritime trade routes globally. Greece remains committed to safeguarding maritime security and freedom of navigation in the region of the Red Sea through the EU naval operation ASPIDES, with full respect to its defensive posture. This instability is further exacerbated by the illegal arms flow and reinforcements of Houthis' capability in terms of weaponry, advanced technology and training, in violation of the arms embargo regime established by Security Council Resolution 2216. In this context, we underline the importance of appointing with no further delay the fifth member of the 2140 Committee panel of experts with the role of monitoring and assessing the arms flow in the region. This is an essential part of the panel's work. We further stress the need for the reinforcement of UNVIM's operational capability in upholding the arms embargo regime. We are also deeply concerned about the stockpiling of weaponry by the Houthis and the militarization of civilian areas in violation of international humanitarian law and the obligation to protect civilian population that may endanger the safety of residential areas and lead to extended civilian casualty. Third, maritime security in the Red Sea region cannot be attained without a sustainable and long-lasting political solution to the Yemeni conflict. In concluding, Madam President, we reiterate our unwavering support to the SG Special Envoy, Mr. Grunberg, and his persistent efforts to engage all relevant actors to a peace negotiation dialogue through an inclusive Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political process under the UN auspices, fully respecting the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity of Yemen. Also, women's full and indiscriminate participation to this process remains vital. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of China.
President, I thank Special Envoy Grunberg and ASG Masuya for their briefings. I welcome the permanent representative of Yemen to today's meeting. I would like to make a few remarks. First, for some time, the Houthis and Israel have been attacking each other. Airports and port facilities have been damaged and tensions have continued to rise. China expresses its concerns and calls on all parties concerned to remain calm and restrained and avoid taking actions that would escalate tensions. The navigation safety in the Red Sea should be maintained, and Yemen's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity should be respected. Second, we must remain committed to advancing a political solution to the Yemen issue through dialogue and negotiation. Recently, the two parties to the conflicts announced reopening of certain roads, a step that China welcomes. We hope both sides will build on this momentum, move towards each other, enhance communication, rebuild trust, and make further progress in critical areas such as a nationwide ceasefire and economic recovery. These efforts are essential for creating favorable conditions to advance a comprehensive political process that's led and owned by the Yemeni people. China supports the mediation efforts of Special Envoy Grunberg and looks forward to greater contributions from regional countries in this process. Third, last week, the Security Council issued a presidential press statement marking the first anniversary of the detention of the individuals concerned by the Houthis armed forces. China urges all parties to intensify engagement and work towards the prompt release of all detained individuals. According to a World Bank report, Yemen's humanitarian situation remains dire and its economy is projected to contract further this year. We call on the international community, particularly traditional donors, to scale up both humanitarian and development assistance to Yemen and to provide adequate financial support for UN operations in the country. Fourth, resolving the issues in Yemen and the Red Sea requires the joint efforts of all relevant parties and a favorable regional environment. The Gaza conflict has persisted for over 600 days, claiming the lives of over 55,000 Palestinians and plunging over 2 million Gaza residents into an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. The international community should prioritize ending the Gaza conflict and alleviating the humanitarian crisis while working to de-escalate regional tensions. We stand ready to work with the international community to continue unremitting efforts towards this end. President, the United States delegation has made ridiculous accusations towards China in her statement. The accused Chinese company has made public statements stating that the accusation by the United States is a malicious slandering. This company has no business connections with either Iran or Houthi armed forces. President, just as many countries has pointed out, including China, that the current tension in the Red Sea has a close connection to the Gaza conflict. Without the permanent ceasefire in Gaza, the conflict in the Red Sea will not stop. But standing on the opposite side of the international community and by abusing its veto rights and interfere in international community's efforts in stopping the conflicts in Gaza and avoiding the international community from saving the Gaza people from their dire situation, the United States has no right to accuse other people. This afternoon, the UN will convene the emergency special GA and will also convene on the Palestinian issue and will vote on the draft resolution. Let's look at the behavior of the United States in this afternoon. Let's see if, as their claim, they're really constructive and responsible on this issue. Thank you.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Yemen.
اسمحي لي السيدة
Madam President, allow me first to congratulate you and your friendly country, Guyana, on your presidency of this Council for this month, and we wish you success. We would also like to thank your predecessor, the permanent representative of Greece, and their friendly country for their successful presidency of this Council last month. I thank Mr. Hans Grunberg and Ms. Joyce Msuya for their briefings. Madam President, for over 10 years, our Yemeni people, who are dear and long-suffering, have been facing crises in their lives, bearing heavy burdens because of the war waged by the terrorist Houthi militias that are backed by the Iranian regime. The Houthis have destroyed state institutions, the livelihoods of Yemenis, leaving behind some of the worst humanitarian crises on the planet. And over the past years of its war against the Yemenis, these militias have established the conviction that they do not seek peace, and that they are not simply a temporary or passing risk. Rather, they are a permanent threat to regional and international peace and security. They are a structural danger threatening Yemen and the region and international maritime routes. The hijacking of ships, planting sea mines, and piracy in the Red Sea did not simply start in 2023. Rather, they have been a recurrent Houthi approach, and for years, even at the height of truce and negotiation. And we think it's unlikely that the Houthi militias and their supporters have any serious desire to change their destructive behavior or to respond to any efforts to restore calm. Any such response is simply an exposed attempt to maneuver and deceive, as an attempt to remain in power, to reposition, and to return to war and escalate their aggressive approach. The Presidential Leadership Council and the Yemeni government renew their commitment towards peace, and we welcome the efforts made by brothers and friends to achieve peace. And we remain open to all initiatives to put an end to this conflict. Our hands will remain extended in peace, because we believe that a political solution is the optimal solution to maintain the interest of Yemenis, of the region, and of the world. And we seek such a genuine and sustained peace that is based on the agreed upon terms of reference for a political solution, especially Security Council 2216, which is the ideal roadmap for a comprehensive solution to the Yemeni conflict. We seek a peace that would meet the aspirations of the Yemeni people in living in stability and development and dignity, and in regaining state institutions that are based on the rule of law, on justice, on equal citizenship, and in the sovereignty of the people. It is unfortunate that all of the attempts made by the Yemeni government and all of the regional and international efforts and the efforts of the United Nations to put an end to this crisis, unfortunately, they were not meant to succeed because of the refusal and the belligerence of the Houthi militias. All of these efforts have failed, despite the fact that the Presidential Leadership Council and the Yemeni government have welcomed every peace initiative, including the roadmap adopted by our brethren in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. These Houthi militias continued to attack oil installations. They continue to target civilians and residential neighborhoods, and they continue to mobilize militarily at all fronts. Their exploits have harmed the interests and gains of the Yemeni people. They have brought upon Yemen Israeli airstrikes and aggression. They have led to the destruction of the infrastructure, including seaports and power plants and airports. They have also led to the destruction of 4 Yemeni airline airplanes after these airplanes were hijacked, and they were held in Sana'a airport despite the fact that there was an anticipated Israeli strike. The Houthi militias continue in their reckless escapades towards more ruin and destruction that will be wrought upon the Yemeni people. And the road that was opened, as the Special Representative and Mrs. Msuya said, connecting Sana'a, and Aden. This road was opened upon the initiative of the Yemeni government to alleviate the humanitarian suffering of the Yemeni people. After the escapades of the Houthi militias have destroyed airports and seaports, and our Yemeni people in these areas under the militias' controls could not find any outlets for transport or for travel. Every effort to achieve peace has failed to this very day, and any such efforts will fail in the future as long as there is no genuine partner for peace. This group does not believe in peace. It does not recognize the state, does not recognize law. It is an armed ideological group that adopts ideologies giving it the divine right to control people. It refuses to acknowledge any form of civil statehood or equal citizenship. It does not believe in civil rights and liberties. It does not recognize political partnership. Yemen's stability is the only genuine guarantee for the stability of the region and the world. We call upon the international community and all friends and brethren to support the Yemeni government in regaining state institutions and establishing its control throughout Yemen to put an end to this conflict and to mend conditions and to dry up the sources of terrorism and chaos. There can be no development while there is violence and conflict, and there can be no economy and no sustainable peace under armed blackmail. Madam President, the Yemeni government continues to work on reforming financial and administrative and economic institutions, and we are committed to the 5 tracks which are mainly geared at the achievement of peace, ending the coup and maintaining the legal status of the country and the state, combating corruption, enhancing transparency and accountability, instituting financial and administrative reforms, as well as developing economic sources and ensuring the optimal utilization of external grants and aid. We confirm our commitment to establish a strategic partnership with all donors, and we appreciate the importance of cooperation to achieve our joint goals so that we can overcome the current crisis, which has directly affected our ability to offer basic services to citizens and implement the SDGs. We assure regional and international partners We assure our regional and international partners that supporting the Yemeni government is an investment in international and regional peace and security. We believe that achieving security and stability in Yemen is an inseparable part of the security and stability of the region and the world. We call upon all our brethren and friends and international organizations and donors to support our efforts so that we can offer basic services and we can meet our obligations as well as achieve economic recovery and stability. Such support will be part of the international community's efforts to regain security and to return security and peace to Yemen. And here we would like to express our sincere appreciation to our brothers in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. We thank them for the support that they have been giving to the Yemeni government and people and for their continued developmental and humanitarian interventions under these exceptional and critical circumstances. Madam President, the areas under the control of the Houthi militias have become areas of oppression and terrorism where the most heinous crimes and violations are being practiced against our Yemeni people, including killing and kidnapping and arbitrary detentions against civilians. All forms of physical and psychological torture take place there, simply targeting them simply because their political and ideological allegiances may run counter to the thoughts of these militias. Moreover, they extract confessions of fabricated offenses from them. The systemic oppression of the militias targets the freedom of expression, the freedom of the media. They aim to blackmail citizens, impose fines, and plunder public and private property. They recruit children, one of the biggest recruitment campaigns of our age, sending them to the front lines to meet their death, such ignoring all values, be they religious, humanitarian, or moral. Moreover, these militias stockpile and store weapons and explosives in residential areas and in the homes of innocents in a blatant violation of international norms and laws. The most recent of these crimes was an explosion in a weapons warehouse in the area or the neighborhood of Bani Hushash in Sana'a on the morning of May 22nd, killing 60 civilians, most of whom were women and children, and injuring dozens. There was another explosion on the 30th of May in warehouses storing heavy weapons and rockets in Taiz, which has led to the death and injury of tens of civilians. Madam President, a year has passed since the Houthi militias seized and detained employees of the United Nations and NGOs and IGOs working in Yemen, as well as civil society institutions in Yemen and diplomatic missions. We, the Yemeni government, expressed our extreme concern over the continued detention of this personnel and their impact on efforts to alleviate the suffering of the Yemeni people and creating a working environment for the humanitarian community in the areas controlled by the Houthi militias. We call upon the international community and this esteemed council to exert maximum pressure on these militias so that they would respect international humanitarian law, and we call upon you to take firm measures to put an end to these violations and to ensure the immediate and unconditional release of all those who have been kidnapped and detained. We renew our call to undertake serious measures to transfer the offices of the United Nations and international organizations working in Yemen to the temporary capital Aden to guarantee the security of humanitarian and developmental workers and to furnish them with a safe working environment. In closing, Madam President, and in light of the bleak situation of the current humanitarian situation and in light of the frozen oil exports because of the Houthi attacks on oil installations, the decreased funding of humanitarian operations in Yemen has had a catastrophic impact on all sectors, especially the health sector, which has been greatly damaged, as is manifest in the spread of disease and epidemics recently in several governorates. We renew our call upon all member states and all friendly states and international organizations and donors to support the humanitarian response plan in a manner that would meet the humanitarian needs in all sectors. We call upon the United Nations and the international community to keep the humanitarian situation in Yemen a priority until we overcome the current circumstances and to avoid a possible health crisis. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Yemen for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.